Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining in. My name is Matthew Hill, and I'm a health physicist. I've been in this field for coming up on 10 years now, back in 2015 when I was first introduced to this field of health physics. So, today I wanted to take a few moments just to talk about CHP certification and perhaps share a little bit about my journey in the CHP kind of certification process and maybe provide a few tips and tricks that you can consider if certification is something that you feel like you would like to pursue. So, a little bit about myself. I graduated in 2017. I got a bachelor's degree in physics. And kind of while I was going through my undergraduate program, I quickly realized that, man, I don't really know what I want to do. And it wasn't very clear how a physics degree would directly translate into a full-time career. And in 2015, I had the opportunity to start out as a little baby intern for Surrey Power Station, where I was a health physics technician. That was my first time stepping in to the door of a nuclear facility. And I very quickly learned that my physics background would be a huge asset in becoming a health physicist with time to come. So, just a few things I really found over the years, maybe I'd like to share with you is one, this certification takes time. Like I said, I've been working in this health physics field for almost 10 years now. 3 of those years was spent as a health physics technician. If you know anything about the ABHP, the board, the committee, they just aren't going to entertain health physics technician time towards the CHP certification. So, if this is something you would like to pursue in the future, I really recommend, there's a lot of value in being a technician. I've often thought back to like the reason I'm so operationally focused is because I started out learning how to swing a meter, survey, control radiological hazards. I've had a lot of great colleagues in the past who have gone on to really distinguish themselves as a health physics technician and move on to operational supervisor positions, and I've come to appreciate that. But one thing you need to know is you have 6 years that you must obtain experience in a bona fide health physicist role that demonstrates some level of professional judgment. So I wouldn't get caught up too much as to exactly what role you're performing. I started out as a programmatic HP working in a training program for Los Alamos National Lab and moved on to an operational role with Sandia. I think there's value in a lot of different HP roles that you can find. And that's not even to mention like the technical services that you can get into, whether that's running a dosimetry lab or working in a count room. There's lots of opportunities for you to get involved and really develop good CHP experience. So one question I often get asked by folks that I've worked with, maybe mentored in the past, is, should I try to take part 1 early, right? So if you know anything about the CHP exam, it comes in 2 parts. So you have part 1, it's a 150 question test. You get about 3 hours to perform it. They've moved this completely online, so you'll apply. I think it's Pearson VUE if you're familiar with kind of a proctored testing facility. The results still take a while to come back because every test is reviewed to make sure the questions were fair. But part 1 is going to be primarily looking at your fundamentals. So if you've ever taken the NRRPT certification exam, just kind of imagine this exam as being the NRRPT, but with a little bit more complexity. It is a harder exam. The questions, the topics are very similar, but maybe the approach you would take to solving the question changes. I took both in the same year. I would recommend, if you have the 5 years experience, to sit for the NRRPT, to go ahead and take that right before part 1 to prepare. I think you'll find there's a lot of resources out there, and once you've done one, you can quickly pass the other. But in regards to taking it early, if you have a bachelor's degree or an advanced degree in health physics or a STEM field, the ABHP does allow you to sit for the part 1 after 1 year of experience. And I remember 2018 rolled around, and by golly, I was ready to sit for that exam. I was sharp. I could do integrals in my head. I had done so much mathematics through undergraduate. Why on earth would I hold myself back and not go for the part 1 exam? I had a few CHPs kind of pull me aside and really talk to me about like what that meant, and I've really come to appreciate this advice. And there's no rush here. In fact, you're required to pass part 2 which is the open-ended version of this test that's 10 questions and 6 hours long, within 7 years. Okay, so let's see, if you hold a health physicist role, you want to end up sitting for part one, maybe you do it right away. Gosh, you've got 5 years that has to go by between part one and going into part two. For anybody that's ever studied for a certification exam, it's a lot of cram sessions, right? There's your experience you can draw upon, there's fundamental concepts that you've kind of adopted into your everyday work, but there's a lot of HP trivia that gets thrown in, right? Different isotopes, half-lives, shielding materials, gamma constants, you name it. That stuff will get dusty, especially if you go for the early test for part one. Now, if you want to prove it to yourself, you like testing, you want to just go for it, I'm not going to say like, hey, don't do it. But just be prepared, because when it comes to part two, you will have maybe one, maybe two, if you time it just right, attempts to get part two completed at the 6-year time frame. And albeit there's some folks, CHPs, that have waited 10, 15, 20 years to sit for this exam. And experience is going to be one of your greatest assets to have to draw upon to pass it, and apply professional judgment for the graders to appreciate. So just be aware of that. That option is out there. It's on the ABHP website. If you are a go-getter and you want to just go ahead and prove that your undergraduate was like a success and you understand these fundamental concepts, I think that's great. But just bear in mind, there is no shame. In fact, myself, I waited until year 5 to sit for part 1. And I ended up doing NRRPT in March. I took part 1 in June, and now I'll be sitting for part 2 1 year later, this year in 2025 in July. So I'm not saying it's the best approach, but things that I've really come to appreciate about that is, I'm able to keep all of that HP trivia kind of fresh. Every time I go back into studying, it's like, oh yeah, I know, half-life of cobalt-60 is 5.27 years. Like, I can just rattle that stuff off at this point. So another thing too is, if you're pursuing a master's degree, I've found that really helpful. I'm a student at Oregon State as well, and as I'm going through my external dosimetry classes or internal dosimetry classes, these are all pertinent things that pop up on the CHP exam. So really try to direct your efforts, so all of your study efforts, maybe your education goals, let them coalesce right around the CHP certification time, and it's going to give you an excellent shot at being able to apply your experience, take what you're learning in school and other preparation exams, and funnel it into the part 2. One resource I would highly recommend is DataChem. And I'll put a link in the description below for this. I believe it's either a subscription or a one-time fee, but I believe they'll reimburse, if you don't end up passing the exam. It is a great resource to use. A lot of the questions, especially for HP trivia, are really nice to kind of see them. I would say, like, every week on a Monday morning, I would just take 15 minutes. Hey, I'm going to run through some DataChem. And it's a repository, a database of HP trivia questions, multiple guess, and it covers everything that you would need for the part 1 exam. I think there's a little bit of understanding, the fundamentals. You'll see the part 2 fundamentals as far as shielding, dosimetry, what types of chips are used in TLDs, waste classifications, DOT requirements, you name it. All that stuff kind of gets funneled in, and I think DataChem is an excellent resource to use. I'm not saying it's the only thing you should use, but I highly, 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 highly recommend using that one. There's other professional kind of development courses. I believe Tom Johnson out of CSU has like a asynchronous lectures, examples, where you can go through and just really refresh on each of these topics. Not trying to promote one over the other. I believe Bevilacqua has a class. The thing with those is they're expensive. And if you maybe don't have the support of your employer, it's not really approachable from like an individual trying to pay for it. Like $2,000 for 10 months access to Tom Johnson's class, or I think Bevilacqua's up to like $4,000 or $5,000. And I think there's a little bit of price grabbing going, because they know employers will reimburse it, and I know there's a heavy emphasis for employers to want their folks to get CHPs. So just be aware of that. If you don't maybe have the support from your employers to get that reimbursed, part of me developing some of these videos is to provide free resources. But DataChem, definitely approachable. You should be able to purchase a subscription, and I highly recommend you look into that one. Feel free to look. Also, HPS chapters. I found local HPS chapters, maybe more so in the past few years, have worked very hard to kind of provide guided solutions to CHP Part 2 exams and study sessions if you're working for this. So, even if you're not in, the early career professionals chapter or the accelerator group or what have you, keep an eye out for your local chapters. Go to your local chapter meetings, right? Let that be a reminder that, we are a community. We're always looking to grow and develop ourselves. And I really believe, this has been a hot topic for folks, is to be able to provide these resources. I think I've paid the early career professionals, it's $6 for a 2-hour kind of prep. You go work through the problems, come with questions, and you have access to some of the really smart minds in the community. So definitely take advantage of those. In regards to Part 2, I've interviewed quite a few CHPs, talked to a bunch of my mentors, and kind of come up with my own strategy. I'm going to say, step 1 is make sure you develop your plan. And if you're flying solo, you don't have an opportunity to go to an intensive 40, hour class or 80-hour class, you're going to be on your own, right? So you really need to have a good structured study plan. For me, the application was in January, and January, February, March, now April. It's been kind of, 5 hours per week, give or take. If I, can just do a couple problems on my lunch break at work, that's what I aim to do. I'll go through and use the resources available to you. The ABHP posts, 5 or 6, maybe 8 practice tests. And if you're an HPS member, and I highly recommend you sign up for your HPS membership, go ahead and download. They have an entire prep book with 60 to 70 questions of all the different types of topics, whether that's the fundamental questions for 50 points or the specialty areas for 100 points. Kind of work out topically what's on the exam. So, ABHP has a great resource in the exam prep guide. Kind of go through their description. I think there's 5 or 6 key fundamental areas. You're going to have 6 questions. You have to answer all 6. You're going to need to know those, right? And whether that's looking at instrumentation, internal, external dissymmetry, shielding calculations, general regulations and emergency response, that type of things, you should have a very good feeling for where your proficiency is. Same thing with your specialty areas. If you've worked at an accelerator facility, by golly, put that at the top of your list of what question you're going to answer. Same thing if you've worked in the medical field, and had to deal with more coming up with shielding calculations and dealing with radiation producing devices. Same thing for fuel cycle. Kind of work out each of those categories. And I would recommend in your list, when you have each of them lined up, just kind of notate what you feel most confident in kind of at the beginning. So you know what to prepare. It's good for your morale. It's good for your momentum and energy to practice problems that you feel confident in. But realistically, you need to know where your weak areas are. And that's where you should be focusing your study time. Definitely take time to ensure the things you're confident in, you're able to solve the problems correctly. But figure out where your weak areas are. For me, in the specialty topical areas, I've decided there's 5 categories I'm going to focus on. I feel like in most cases, you should see 4 of them pop up in the specialty area. They're not that different on a given year to year. So the accelerator question, I'm going to be prepared for that. What does it look like for buildup of activation products in metals? What are the dose rates? What are the typical hazards you see with accelerators? I'm going to make sure that's my number 1 question. So when I go to my pick 4, I'm going to go straight to the accelerator question. Have I seen it before? Is it something I'm comfortable doing? Go through and get my points as possible, as quickly as possible there. I think behind that, I've got reactors. I feel really confident in reactors. I've come out of a nuclear power plant, very familiar with that waste stream, the typical hazards you see with activation products, and some of the ways we control the work in that regard. Behind that, fuel cycle. I think you'll often hear ionizing radiation and fuel cycle as 2 kind of easy catch-up points. For me, I'm sorry. I got into the business for ionizing radiation. I did not get into this business for non-ionizing. I don't mean any disrespect. If you see that and you want to go for it, I highly recommend you kind of take a pick. Do you want to look at fuel cycle, or do you want to look at ionizing radiation and study those practice problems? I think ionizing radiation will pop up more often compared to the types of questions than non-ionizing radiation. But in both cases, they're a good topic to kind of learn very quickly along the way, to the point where you can successfully pass that question on the exam. What I like about nuclear fuel cycles, it has to do a lot with like criticality safety, right? So I worked at Los Alamos. We've dealt with plutoniums and uraniums and that type of thing. So things that maybe you would do at a nuclear power plant where you're not dealing with fissile material, by golly, you cannot do that with plutonium-239. Don't get a bucket to capture any liquid waste that's coming down with fissile material in it that's going to put it into a potentially critically unsafe configuration. So keep that in mind. So yeah, accelerators, reactors. I want to say also, yeah, I'm kind of blanking on the other areas. Fuel cycle, and I've got a couple others, but I've ranked them in my head, so I know when I go, I'm going to look for the things I'm most confident in, especially on test day. I'm going to start with the specialty areas. There's 400 points there. I need 469. Don't ever forget that goal. You need 469 points. If you ace all 4 of your topical areas that you're most specialized in, you need to go get 2 questions out of 6 on the general one. So some folks will start, there's 300 points in the 6 questions you have to answer that are more fundamental. The questions are a little bit more straightforward. The topical areas get a little bit more in depth. It's easier to get tripped up. There's very like specific circumstances and maybe assumptions you need to make that if you don't work in those areas, it'll be harder to catch. But remember, at the end of the day, you need your 469 points. So part of my test taking strategy is identifying what areas I'm most strong in. I'm not going to learn all the different types of specialty areas because I'm going to be honest, I don't deal with medical physics very often. I don't really want to go play and learn how to play in that arena. I'm going to stick to what I know. I'm going to stick to my strengths, but I am going to learn fuel cycle and or non-ionizing radiation as backups, just in case you start skimming through the test and you can see a lot of points to get quickly. So that's something I would also recommend kind of as I'm going through these practice exams. Some of these questions you can get 70 points before you even do a single calculation, just from theory. So that's kind of tying back to part 1 and NRRPT prep. If you have a good grasp on HP trivia, knowing that, strontium-90 produces, yttrium-90, which is a high energy beta, which is going to produce a lot of bremsstrahlung. Things like that you're able to pull out and just say, hey, here are some advantages and disadvantages, and pick up points along the way. So on test day, after you've worked through all your preparatory work, come in with your plan. You've developed it. You need to go in and execute it. Execute that plan exactly as you've practiced. You'll notice here I've got I'll put this in the link here. This is my mock-up of what I think the ABHP answer sheet will look like, right? It's very much question, candidate number, pages, and there's your space to work in. I want to practice exactly as I'm going to perform on that exam day because time is of the essence. When I took part 1, that is one of the few tests I've taken. I have not had the time to go back and check every answer that I put down on that graded answer sheet. It goes by fast. You need to know your stuff. And in the same regard, on CHP part 2, I'm going to go in and perform efficiently and as fast as possible to maximize the number of points that I can receive. So for me, I'm moving straight to the 400 point section, and I'm going straight to the accelerator question. I've got a lot of experience as an accelerator operational health physicist, and I want to lean into my strengths to be able to maximize the points that are coming out. However, when I get to that part, the topical area, and I'm looking at the specialty 100 point questions, I'm going to skim and sight read each question. Just because it's a specialty area doesn't mean I want to expend the time for it. So I'm going to read briefly each of the questions. How much of this is calculation and how much of this is just HP trivia, right? Because that's going to help save some time. It's all about time management. So I'll go through each of my top 5 areas, skim through them, make sure that they are reasonable. The time to perform, is not bogging me down in any way. And then I'm going to start working through. You have 6 hours. I think, the questions are intended to be give or take 30 to 40 minutes for the topical answers, the 100-point questions, and 15 to 20 for the fundamentals. So kind of keep that in mind. Maybe set aside time blocks, have a watch, keep your eye on the clock so you're not spending 5 hours in these 400 points and not giving any time towards the other section. Time management's going to be of the essence there. Of course, always use the same calculator you're going to be bringing. Look out for calculator restrictions. I use a standard TI-36X. There you go, TI-36X Pro. I've used this for the last 5 years. It has been the calculator of choice since I've joined the industry. So, yeah, with that, after you move through part 2, go back to part 1, same thing. You're going to go look at the questions. That's probably more important to sight read to see which questions you feel most comfortable with, rank them, and just go for it. The important part here is practice and repetition. Practice and repetition. So work through the entire HPS study book. Go through each question. Make sure you're getting to the point where you're able to not just memorize the answers, right? All the answers are provided. But make sure where there's areas where you have to understand some concepts, spend the time reading. I think Introduction to Health Physics, great textbook. Radiological Health Handbook, great reference material. Depending on what topical areas, there's a lot of resources. Get on Google, go search Reddit, look at ABHP, look at Nuke Worker. A lot of resources to learn about the best ways to study for this exam. If you can afford a Tom Johnson type class, go take the Tom Johnson type class. Have access to those materials. Bare minimum, part 1, make sure you get DataChem. Go ahead and sign in, get an account, and start just going through repetition after repetition after repetition. So I will say, as part of my study plan, what that kind of looks like is, and I'll do a nice little graph for you, effort and time over here. And as we approach the exam date, it's kind of looking like this. So a little bit kind of stepping up. I decided to go through and just kind of segment my time. I had 6 months. So the first phase was really looking at just fundamentals, refreshing on things I learned from NAARPT in part 1, making sure that I can go through 50-point questions, understand how to get DACs, how to get ALIs, how to calculate dose, how to perform shielding calculations, figuring out statistics and counting. Instrumentation, know your regions of the voltage curve and gas amplification, how that works out. So little things like that. That was all kind of in here. The next phase is stepping up to the topical areas. So remember I said rank your topical areas, maybe your top 5, maybe top 6 areas. And really make sure you understand each of the types of questions that could pop up, different types of HP trivia that you'd be expected to know, and that type of thing. Kind of the third phase is getting into practice mode, right? So now, instead of just going question by question, you're going to want to start looking at maybe practice tests. Maybe you're going to do half practice tests just looking at the fundamental questions. Give yourself, 2 hours, 3 hours. Go through and actually answer all of the general fundamental questions and grade yourself, right? How did you do? Was there a new question you hadn't seen before? What happens if you didn't know an exact reference? How did you work through that? Were you able to get the points at the end of the day? That's kind of where you would spend maybe a month or 2 going through and actually doing back-to-back questions to start building up endurance. Right here, and for me, this is June 1st to July 15th. Or 14th, or whenever the test day is, that last month and a half, that is continuous discharge, right? Just maximizing your effort, right? If you start putting too much effort in too early, burnout is a thing. And the last thing you want to do is burn out as you get closer to the exam. You want to slowly ramp up and build your skills, build your momentum, build your morale, so that when you get to June 1st, you're able to start running through practice tests. Every weekend, sit down, spend half the day, go through the practice exam. At some point, it's going to become so repetitive, you're going to have these questions memorized. The amount of times I've heard, hey, I did this question, it showed up almost verbatim on the actual exam. It's going to pay off dividends. So a lot of the point coming up to June 1st is really spending the time digesting the material, understanding the fundamental concepts, applying it to your experience. Where have you seen that in the field, and how can you apply it to the questions to show your judgment? But June 1st, that's all out. Like, you've built that. You need to have that knowledge locked in and use what you've got. June 1st to July 15th is all about practice exams. So spend that last month every week going through practice exam after practice exam. Join the ABHP study groups. Join a study group locally. Make sure you have a partner that you can work through this together with. And ultimately, the idea is you get to exam day and you implement and execute exactly as you planned and you prepared. So finally, like, the last thing I would say is, if you're traveling for your exam, do not travel the morning of. Get a hotel. Even if your employer's not going to pay for a hotel, pay for a hotel. It's $100. Call it an insurance policy. You want to give yourself the best opportunity to perform. All of this is to help you perform well, right? The morning of, the 6 hours before, 4 hours before your exam, like, sure, if you want to, great. But ideally, you're locking in that information, you're preserving your energy, because the 6 hours ahead of you is going to take long. Bring snacks, bring water, bring your calculator, bring multiple pencils, pens, all of that. Just make sure you have it, you're prepared. Sit for that exam and stick to your plan and execute. So I hope this video helps. It gives a little bit of an insight as to how I'm preparing. A lot of it has to do with just understanding kind of the core areas. Go through the ABHP exam prep guide, kind of segment like different topics, whether that's dosimetry, whether that's shielding and, radiation dose calculations, what have you, emergency response. Kind of segment it out, put it in whatever logical order you want, and then identify your strengths and your weaknesses, rank them 1 through 6 or 1 through whatever, and then start practicing to build your strengths so you can maximize the points. So at the end of the day, best of luck for anybody that's sitting for this exam. If you have any questions or comments or any tips or tricks you'd like to provide as well, throw them in the comments. My intention here is to make this video available for everybody so that they can see just exactly how everybody's preparing, because it is a little bit abstract, right? Like, it's a hard exam, and I really want to make sure that folks have the best resources and materials available to them. Kind of moving forward, my plan is to release, I don't know, as often as I can, a guided solution, kind of going through the HPS book or going through a practice exam to walk through and actually show you the pen strokes of how you get to the final answer, and kind of augment that with my understanding of health physics. Not that I'm an expert, but there's probably general fundamental RP knowledge everybody should have, and as I vocalize that, I hope we can build a collective knowledge that's going to help anybody, regardless of their financial circumstances, regardless of their employer support, can look towards and help prepare and be successful for the examination. So with that, thanks for joining me. Keep an eye out for future videos, and looking forward to this journey together. Thanks.